1970s should have been muscle car paradise. Instead, it became the decade that killed the dream. Emissions regulations, insurance premiums, and the oil crisis strangled engines that once roared with defiance. Today, we're counting down the 12 worst muscle cars out of the 1970s. The disappointing legends, the broken promises, and the hollow shells that wore famous nameplates but delivered nothing but heartbreak. These are the cars that proved you can't legislate performance away without consequences. Number 12. The 1974 Pontiac GTO. This wasn't just a bad muscle car. It was automotive blasphemy, wrapped in Pontiac sheet metal. The GTO had invented the muscle car formula back in 1964, stuffing big block power into a mid-size body and creating a legend that defined an entire generation. But by 1974, the GTO nameplate had been reduced to nothing more than an option package on the Pontiac Ventura, a compact economy car that shared its platform with the Chevrolet Nova, where the original GTO packed a 489 cubic inch V8 that made the earth tremble. This imposter carried a 250 cubic inch inline six as standard equipment, generating a pathetic 100 horsepower. Even if you checked every performance box on the order form and upgraded to the optional 350 cubic inch V8, you'd still only extract 195 horsepower, less than half what the original GTO produced a decade earlier. The quarter-mile times told the whole sad story. The 1974 GTO needed nearly 18 seconds to cover the distance, barely faster than a loaded station wagon. The styling was equally tragic, where the classic GTO wore aggressive scoops, bold stripes, and menacing stance. This version looked like somebody had glued a few decals onto a secretary's commuter car and called it performance. The handling was soft and wallowing, the brakes were marginal, and the interior featured hard plastics and cheap materials that reminded you constantly that this was an economy car playing dress-up in muscle car clothes. Pontiac knew they'd committed sacrilege. They killed the GTO after just 7,000 units sold in 1974, ending production of what had once been Detroit's most important nameplate today. These cars are worth a fraction of what real GTOs command, and most collectors pretend they never existed. The few that survive are garage queens, owned by completists who need every GTO variant, not by enthusiasts who actually want to drive them. Number 11. The 1975 Chevrolet Corvette. The Corvette had always been America's sports car, the one vehicle that could legitimately challenge European exotics on performance and style, if not sophistication. But the 1975 model represented everything wrong with 70s automotive engineering: strangled performance, bloated weight, and compromises stacked on top of compromises until the original mission was barely recognizable. The base engine was a joke. The 165 horsepower small block V8 struggled to move the 3,300-pound fiberglass body with anything approaching enthusiasm. 0 to 60 took nearly 9 seconds, and the quarter mile stretched out past 17 seconds. These were numbers that Econoboxes would match a decade later. Even the optional L82 engine, advertised at 205 horsepower, couldn't resurrect the performance that earlier Corvettes had delivered effortlessly. The fuel economy was equally terrible. The Corvette managed barely 12 miles per gallon in mixed driving, proving that you could sacrifice performance and still burn fuel like a muscle car. The handling suffered from Detroit's typical 70s approach to emissions and safety regulations. The steering was vague and overboosted. The suspension was softened for comfort, and the car's considerable weight meant that any aggressive cornering would result in tire-squealing understeer, followed by sloppy body roll. The interior was a sea of plastic and fake wood grain, with instruments that looked like they'd been borrowed from a rental car. The exterior styling had gone from sleek and purposeful to bloated and cartoonish, with massive impact bumpers that added weight and destroyed the clean lines that had made earlier Corvette's beautiful owners discover that their expensive sports cars were slower than family sedans from a decade earlier, returned worse fuel economy than pickup trucks, and handled like luxury barges. The 1975 Corvette proved that you could keep building a legend without keeping any of the qualities that made it legendary in the first place. The convertible option had been eliminated in 1975, removing one of the Corvette's most appealing features and leaving buyers with only a heavy, slow coupe that cost nearly $7,000. Serious money that could have bought multiple used muscle cars with real performance. Number 10, the 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner. The Roadrunner had been the working man's muscle car, the stripped-down street brawler that deleted luxury features to keep the price low and the performance high. But 1971 marked the beginning of the end, as Plymouth tried to maintain the Roadrunner image, while steadily neutering the performance that made it matter. The base engine dropped to a 383 cubic inch V8, making just 250 horsepower. Respectable numbers anywhere, except on a car wearing Roadrunner badges and cartoon bird decals. The famous 440 cubic inch six-pack engine was gone, replaced by a single four-barrel version, making just 370 horsepower, down from the 390 it produced just a year earlier. But the real killer was weight. Plymouth added nearly 200 pounds to the Roadrunner, installing federally mandated safety equipment, heavier bumpers, and emissions controls that strangled power while adding mass. The result was a car that looked aggressive but performed like it was towing an anchor. Quarter-mile times ballooned to the mid-15-second range, and the Roadrunner that once terrorized stoplights now struggled to outrun insurance-friendly compacts. The handling was equally compromised. The suspension was softened to appeal to a broader audience. The steering lost its edge, and the brakes, never the Roadrunner's strong point, now had even more weight to manage with the same marginal stopping power. The interior remained stripped and basic, which would have been fine if the car still delivered performance. But now you were getting poverty-spec accommodations without the speed to justify the sacrifice. The cartoon bird graphics that once seemed playful now looked desperate, like Plymouth was trying to remind buyers of what the Roadrunner used to represent, rather than what it had become. Sales collapsed as buyers realized they could get better performance from used muscle cars than from brand new Roadrunners, and Plymouth watched helplessly as one of their most important nameplates faded into irrelevance. The air grabber hood that had been a performance trademark became just another styling gimmick, sucking in air that the strangled engine couldn't effectively use anyway. Number 9. The 1976 Dodge Charger. The Charger nameplate carried serious weight in American automotive culture. The 1968 and 69 models were icons of speed and style, the cars that made NASCAR exciting and street racing legendary. But by 1976, Dodge had taken the Charger name and slapped it on what was essentially a rebadged Cordoba personal luxury coupe, a car designed for comfort and boulevard cruising, not performance or excitement. The base engine was a slant 6 that made 110 horsepower, an insult to everything the Charger name represented. The optional small block V8s maxed out at around 185 horsepower, and even the biggest available engine, a 440 cubic inch V8, could barely muster 200 horsepower, thanks to emissions controls that choked the life out of every combustion cycle. The styling was the worst kind of 70s excess. Where the original Charger wore clean, aggressive lines and purposeful details, the 1976 version was draped in vinyl roofs, opera windows, and enough chrome trim to build a bumper factory. The interior featured crushed velvet upholstery, shag carpet, and a dashboard covered in fake wood grain that looked like it had been stolen from a mobile home. This wasn't a muscle car. It was a disco lounge on wheels. The performance was exactly what you'd expect from a 2-ton luxury coupe with a strangled engine. 0 to 60 took over 12 seconds. The quarter mile stretched past 18 seconds, and the handling was so soft and disconnected that aggressive cornering wasn't even a consideration. The Charger had gone from race-bred bruiser to retirement community cruiser, and nobody was happy about it, except maybe Dodge's accountants, who watched the personal luxury market boom while muscle car sales evaporated. Enthusiasts mourned what had been lost, and today these cars are worth a tiny fraction of what real Chargers command, unloved reminders of the decade when Detroit lost its way. Number 8. The 1973 Ford Mustang Mach 1. The Mach 1 had been Ford's answer to buyers who wanted Mustang style with serious performance, combining aggressive appearance packages with powerful engines that could back up the bold looks. But the 1973 model showed just how far Ford had fallen from the original pony car mission. The car was massive, over 14 feet long and weighing nearly 3,300 pounds, making it one of the largest and heaviest Mustangs ever produced. The base engine was a 250 cubic inch inline 6 that wheezed out barely 100 horsepower. turning the Mach 1 into one of the slowest cars wearing performance badges in American automotive history. Upgrading to the optional 302 cubic inch V8 got you 140 horsepower, barely enough to move the bloated body with any urgency. The top engine option was a 351 cubic inch V8, making a claimed 156 horsepower, numbers that would have been embarrassing on an economy car, let alone a machine called Mach 1. The quarter-mile times were depressing. Even with the biggest engine, the Mach 1 needed over 17 seconds to cover the distance, and that was with perfect shifts and ideal conditions. Real-world performance was even worse, with 0 to 60 times stretching past 10 seconds, and passing power that required planning your highway merges several exits in advance. The handling was equally tragic. The long hood and short deck proportions that made the Mustang visually appealing created terrible weight distribution, and the soft suspension tuning meant the car wallowed through corners like a cruise ship in rough seas. The styling tried hard to look aggressive, with bold striping, hood scoops, and spoilers. But it all felt like costume jewelry on a car that couldn't deliver any real performance. The interior was cramped despite the car's huge exterior dimensions, with poor visibility, cheap materials, and seats that provided neither comfort nor support. Ford kept building these Mustangs because they sold to buyers who wanted the image of performance without caring about actual speed. But enthusiasts knew the truth. The Mach 1 had become a hollow parody of what the Mustang nameplate once represented. The Ram Air hood scoop was purely cosmetic, feeding nothing but driver ego, and the competition suspension package that was offered couldn't overcome the fundamental problems of excessive weight and insufficient power. Number 7. The 1972 Oldsmobile Cutlass 442. The 442 designation had meant something specific and special when Oldsmobile introduced it in 1964. 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, dual exhausts. It represented a focused performance package on the mid-size Cutlass platform, creating one of the most balanced and capable muscle cars of the 60s. But by 1972, the 442 name was just marketing, applied to a car that had none of the focused performance mission that made the original special. The standard engine was a 455 cubic inch V8 that should have been a monster, but emissions controls and low compression ratios meant it produced just 250 horsepower and a pathetic 350 pound-feet of torque, numbers that small block engines had exceeded years earlier. The 4-speed manual transmission that had been part of the original 442 formula was rarely ordered, with most buyers choosing the automatic, because the manual couldn't overcome the engine's fundamental lack of power anyway. The car weighed over 3,700 pounds, meaning the already modest power had to move serious mass. Quarter-mile performance hovered around the 16-second mark, barely quicker than a station wagon, and nowhere near what muscle car buyers expected. The handling was soft and imprecise, tuned more for comfort than cornering, and the brakes struggled to manage the car's weight during aggressive driving. The styling had gone from crisp and purposeful to rounded and generic, with the 442 package adding stripes and badges that couldn't disguise the fundamental lack of character underneath. The interior featured the typical GM 70s approach, lots of plastic, fake wood, and materials that felt cheap the moment you touched them. Oldsmobile kept the 442 alive through the mid-70s, but each year brought further decontenting and performance losses until the nameplate finally died in 1977, mourned by nobody except historians who remembered what it used to mean today. These cars are cheap and unloved, worth a fraction of what 60s 442s command, serving as museum pieces documenting Detroit's fall from grace. Number 6. The 1974 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am SD 455. Wait, the Super Duty Trans Am on a worst muscle cars list? The car that Pontiac advertised as the most powerful machine you could buy in 1974? Yes, absolutely. Because the SD 455 represented perhaps the biggest gap between marketing promises and real-world performance in muscle car history. Pontiac claimed the Super Duty engine made 290 horsepower, which sounded impressive for 1974, when most performance cars barely broke 200. But the reality was far more complicated and disappointing. The SD455 was built to satisfy emissions and fuel economy regulations, while maintaining some performance credibility, which meant Pontiac had to use every trick in the book just to extract that 290 horsepower from 455 cubic inches of displacement. Independent testing revealed the car was nowhere near as quick as the horsepower figures suggested. Quarter-mile times hovered around 15.5 seconds. Decent for the era, but not the 13-second performance that 290 horsepower should have delivered. The problem was the engine's terrible power delivery. All that displacement and all those cubic inches produced power in the narrowest, most useless RPM range imaginable. Below 3,000 RPM, the engine was a dog, making the Trans Am feel slow and unresponsive in normal driving. Above 4,000 RPM, it had already passed peak power and was heading toward the fuel cutoff. The sweet spot was maybe 800 RPM wide, and if you weren't constantly rowing the 4-speed manual to keep the engine on the boil, the car felt slower than the numbers suggested. The SD455 was also horrifically unreliable. The engine ran so hot and so lean to meet emissions targets that it would destroy itself if not maintained obsessively. Valve guides wore out, pistons cracked, and the whole engine would consume itself within 50,000 miles if driven hard. Pontiac built fewer than 1,000 SD Trans Ams, and most spent more time being rebuilt than being driven. The price was equally insulting, over $4,300 in 1974 money, making it one of the most expensive Firebirds ever sold. Buyers could have purchased used muscle cars from the 60s with real performance for less money and gotten more reliable, faster machines. Today, these cars are valuable as collectibles because of their rarity, but nobody who actually drives them pretends they're great muscle cars. They're conversation pieces, historical footnotes, documenting the moment when Pontiac tried to keep the performance dream alive and discovered that compromises stacked on compromises don't add up to anything worth celebrating. The massive Firebird decal on the hood and the aggressive shaker scoop became symbols of false advertising. Promising performance, the drivetrain simply couldn't deliver consistently. Number 5, the 1975 Chevrolet Camaro. The Camaro had been Chevrolet's pony car warrior since 1967, battling the Mustang for sales and street racing supremacy. But the 1975 model represented the absolute nadir of Camaro performance, a car so thoroughly neutered by regulations and corporate cost-cutting that it barely deserved to wear the nameplate. The base engine was a 250 cubic inch inline-six, making 105 horsepower, barely enough power to merge onto the highway, let alone challenge anything in a straight line. The small block V8 options were equally depressing. The 350 cubic inch V8 made 145 horsepower, while the top-spec 400 cubic inch engine squeezed out just 175 horsepower. These were numbers that would have embarrassed grocery getters a decade earlier. The quarter-mile performance was tragic across the board. Even the 400 cubic inch Camaro needed over 17 seconds to cover the distance, and the 6-cylinder models were lucky to break 19 seconds. 0 to 60 times stretched past 11 seconds, and passing power was virtually non-existent. Step on the gas to overtake a slow-moving vehicle, and you'd have time to reconsider your life choices while waiting for the Camaro to slowly accelerate past. The handling was compromised by soft springs, vague steering, and a suspension tune that prioritized comfort over any pretense of sporting character. The brakes were marginal, fading quickly under repeated use and requiring excessive pedal pressure for even moderate stops. The styling had gone from aggressive and purposeful to rounded and soft, with impact bumpers that destroyed the clean lines and added weight without adding safety. The interior was a disaster of hard plastics, cheap vinyl, and materials that felt like they'd been sourced from the discount bin. The seats provided neither comfort nor support. The driving position was awkward, and the visibility was terrible thanks to thick pillars and a high beltline. Chevrolet was essentially selling the Camaro on nostalgia and image alone, because the actual driving experience offered nothing that justified choosing it over a sensible sedan. Sales collapsed as buyers realized they could get better fuel economy, more interior space, and similar performance from family cars that cost less, and didn't pretend to be something they weren't. The 1975 Camaro proved that you could keep a nameplate alive while killing everything that made it matter: The Rally Sport and Type LT packages offered cosmetic upgrades and luxury touches, but they couldn't disguise the fundamental absence of performance underneath all the stripes and spoilers. Number 4. The 1974 AMC Javelin AMX. American Motors had always been the underdog, the independent automaker that couldn't match the Big Three's resources, but tried to compete through clever engineering and focused performance models. The Javelin AMX was supposed to be AMC's muscle car, their answer to the Camaro and Mustang. But by 1974, it had become a cruel joke, a performance car with no performance and a muscle car with no muscle. The standard engine was a 304 cubic inch V8, making 150 horsepower, which sounds almost respectable until you realize the car weighed over 3,200 pounds and had the aerodynamics of a brick. The optional 360 cubic inch V8 managed 175 horsepower, barely enough to overcome the Javelin's considerable weight and drag. Even the top engine option, the 391 cubic inch V8, could only muster 195 horsepower, making it one of the weakest performance engines available in any American car. The performance numbers were embarrassing. Quarter-mile times stretched past 18 seconds. 0 to 60 took over 10 seconds. And highway passing required advanced planning and prayer. The handling was equally compromised, with soft suspension tuning, vague steering that provided no feedback, and brakes that struggled to manage the car's weight. The styling tried to look aggressive with hood scoops and bold graphics, but everyone knew these were just decorations on a car that couldn't back up its visual promises. The interior was typically AMC, which meant cheap materials, poor fit and finish, and a general sense that you were sitting in a car built by a company that was constantly on the edge of bankruptcy. The seats were uncomfortable, the controls were awkwardly placed, and the whole cabin felt cramped, despite the car's substantial exterior dimensions. The fuel economy was equally disappointing, with the Javelin returning barely 13 miles per gallon in mixed driving, proving that AMC had somehow created a car that was both slow and thirsty. The cooling system was inadequate for the engine bay's tight packaging, causing chronic overheating issues that left owners stranded on summer days when the temperature gauge climbed into the danger zone. AMC killed the Javelin after 1974, ending production of their muscle car experiment and admitting what everyone already knew: they couldn't compete in the performance market anymore. Today, these cars are cheap and unloved, with even the nicest examples selling for a fraction of what comparable Camaros or Mustangs command. They're automotive orphans, forgotten remnants of a company that tried to build muscle cars without the resources or expertise to do it right. Number 3. The 1976 Chevrolet Chevelle. The Chevelle had been one of Chevrolet's most successful nameplates, a mid-size platform that could be optioned into everything from basic transportation to legitimate muscle car. The SS packages of the late 60s and early 70s had created legends, with big block engines and aggressive styling that made the Chevelle a street racing icon. But by 1976, the Chevelle name had been reduced to badges on a generic mid-size sedan that offered nothing resembling performance or excitement. The base engine was a 250 cubic inch inline 6, making 105 horsepower. The small block V8 options maxed out at 165 horsepower from a 305 cubic inch engine. Even if you found one of the rare 400 cubic inch V8s, you'd extract maybe 175 horsepower, less than many modern four-cylinder engines produce. The weight had ballooned past 3,500 pounds, meaning these modest power figures had to move serious mass. Quarter-mile times hovered around 18 seconds. 0 to 60 stretched past 12 seconds, and the Chevelle that once dominated drag strips now struggled to merge onto highways. The handling was atrocious. Soft springs, disconnected steering, and body roll that would make a luxury car blush. The brakes were inadequate for the weight, requiring excessive stopping distances and fading quickly under any aggressive use. The styling had gone from muscular and purposeful to bloated and generic, with rounded edges, excessive chrome, and proportions that looked more like a family sedan than anything resembling a performance car. The interior was a sea of plastic and vinyl, with fake wood grain accents that fooled nobody, and seats that provided neither comfort for long drives nor support for spirited driving. Chevrolet discontinued the Chevelle name after 1977, replacing it with the Malibu and admitting that the performance heritage was dead. Today, these late-model Chevelles are worth almost nothing, with even pristine examples struggling to find buyers who want a reminder of Detroit's worst decade. They represent everything wrong with 70s automotive engineering, compromised performance, bloated dimensions, terrible fuel economy, and build quality that guaranteed rapid depreciation and early trips to the junkyard. Number 2, the 1973 Plymouth Barracuda. The Barracuda had been Plymouth's pony car since 1964, and the 1970 through 74 models had been genuinely impressive machines when properly equipped. The Hemi Cuda and 440 Cuda were legends, capable of running with anything Detroit produced. But by 1973, even the Barracuda couldn't escape the regulations and economics that were killing muscle cars across the industry. The base engine was a 318 cubic inch V8, making 150 horsepower, barely adequate power for a car approaching 3,200 pounds. The optional 340 cubic inch V8 managed 170 horsepower, while the top engine, a 360 cubic inch V8, squeezed out 245 horsepower. That last number sounds almost respectable, until you realize it came from the same displacement that produced over 300 horsepower. Just 2 years earlier, the big blocks were gone, the six-pack engines were history, and even the performance versions of the small blocks had been neutered by emissions controls and insurance-mandated detuning. Quarter-mile performance reflected the power losses. The quickest 73 Barracudas needed about 15.5 seconds to cover the quarter mile, with most examples running well into the 16-second range. These were cars that had run 13s and 14s just a few years earlier, now struggling to beat family sedans. The handling was soft and imprecise, with steering that felt disconnected from the road and suspension that prioritized comfort over any sporting pretense. The brakes were marginal at best, struggling to manage aggressive stops and fading quickly under repeated use. The styling remained aggressive and purposeful. The 70 through 74 Barracuda body was one of the best-looking designs Detroit ever produced, but the performance no longer matched the visual promises. Plymouth knew the end was near. They killed the Barracuda after 1974, ending a decade-long run and admitting that the pony car market had collapsed under the weight of regulations and changing buyer preferences. Today, the early Barracudas, with proper engines, command huge prices, while the 73 and 74 models sell for a fraction as much. Unloved reminders of a nameplate that died slowly and painfully while everyone watched. The distinctive split grille and aggressive fender lines became visual reminders of what could have been. Styling cues that suggested performance the powertrain could no longer deliver. Number 1. The 1975 Dodge Dart Sport. The Dart Sport takes our top spot as the worst muscle car of the 70s because it represented the absolute bottom of Detroit's fall from grace. A compact economy car wearing sporty badges and graphics while delivering performance that couldn't justify the designation sport, let alone muscle car. Dodge marketed the Dart Sport as a performance vehicle, creating models like the Hang 10 package and the Dart Sport 360 that used aggressive graphics, stripes, and scoops to suggest capability the car simply didn't possess. The base engine was a slant 6, making 100 horsepower from 225 cubic inches of displacement. This wasn't performance. This was adequacy at best. Marginal transportation that happened to come in a two-door body with racing stripes. The optional small block V8s weren't much better. The 318 cubic inch engine managed 150 horsepower, while the top-spec 360 cubic inch V8 squeezed out 180 horsepower. These were numbers that wouldn't have impressed anyone even in the depths of the malaise era. Quarter-mile times for the V8-powered Dart Sports hovered around 17 seconds, with six-cylinder models stretching past 19 seconds. 0 to 60 took over 11 seconds with the best engine and 15 seconds or more with the base 6. The handling was typical economy car fare. Soft springs, vague steering, inadequate brakes, and a suspension that was designed to be cheap to manufacture rather than effective at controlling the car's motion. The styling was the worst kind of false advertising. Hood scoops that weren't functional, spoilers that created drag without downforce graphics packages that suggested performance the car couldn't deliver. It was all costume, no substance, like putting racing slicks on a riding mower and calling it a Formula One car. The interior was bargain basement Plymouth, hard plastics, vinyl seats, minimal sound deadening, and materials that started falling apart before you finished making payments. The build quality was atrocious, with panel gaps you could see from across the parking lot, electrical systems that failed randomly, and mechanical components that wore out faster than they should have. Dodge kept building the Dart through 1976, then mercifully killed it and replaced it with the Aspen, which wasn't much better, but at least didn't pretend to be a performance car. Today, these Dart sports are worth almost nothing. Even pristine examples struggle to find buyers, because nobody wants a reminder of the era when Detroit slapped performance badges on economy cars and hoped buyers wouldn't notice the complete absence of actual performance. The Dart Sport wasn't just a bad muscle car. It was proof that the muscle car era had died, and nobody had bothered to bury the corpse. The rally instrument cluster and fake aluminum trim, trying desperately to be something it fundamentally wasn't, and the torsion bar front suspension that had served Mopar well for decades, couldn't overcome the basic problem of insufficient power and excessive weight in a package marketed to buyers who deserved better. The 1970s killed the muscle car dream, strangling power, bloating dimensions, and compromising everything that made American performance cars special. These 12 disasters weren't just bad cars, they were the death rattle of an era. The hollow shells wearing famous names but delivering none of the substance that made those names legendary. Some survive as curiosities, reminders of the decade when regulations and economics destroyed an entire segment of automotive culture. Most ended up in junkyards, unmourned and unremembered, except as cautionary tales about what happens when you prioritize compliance over character. But they taught us something valuable, that you can't fake passion, you can't legislate performance into existence, and you can't slap badges on mediocrity and call it muscle. Which of these disappointments would you rescue from obscurity, and which deserve to stay forgotten? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you love stories from both the peaks and valleys of American automotive history, hit subscribe for more tales from the roads less traveled.